Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Dasha Nekrasova of the Red Scare podcast has been fired from her talent agencies and the movies that she was on because she did an interview with Nick Fuentes recently. So this Red Scare pod, I've never mentioned it before, but these girls have been around for a long time. And essentially the genesis of it was Dasha Nekrasova was in a viral video that was posted by none other than InfoWars, where she was at a Bernie Sanders rally and this on-the-ground person asked her, you know, why are you a communist or something like that. And her response was like, she made a joke about eat the rich, and then she just said, I want everybody to have health care. And so that became a moment that a lot of people related to in terms of, this is the sensible politics. Like, all this other shit you guys are talking about is crazy. I just want people to have healthcare. And ever since then, she has been able to leverage that into a podcasting career with this other girl, Anna Kachian. So they've been doing this Red Scare podcast thing for a long time. It was always sort of the edgelordy kind of left stuff where sometimes you had to even wonder what it was that they were up to. But they were in that space for a long time. And then ever since that initial sort of Trump era, they've been pretty steadily just on the right. And I don't know if it's a pivot or if that was always their goal. It was sort of a candid, on-the-ground moment that this initial viral video was, but it seems pretty suspicious to me that that girl specifically goes on to have a left-wing podcasting career that then turns into this right-wing grift. And they've both, like, converted to Christian nationalism at this point. And, you know, when they had Nick Fuentes on their podcast, Dasha specifically was like fangirling out the whole time. She said that she's a fan of his, a huge fan. And so the whole interview was that from that perspective. And everybody all of a sudden feels like they have to do this warm introductory podcast with Nick Fuentes. On the right, they've just been doing that. And it has stirred a significant amount of controversy, more so than you might have thought. And it seems like, you know, these girls thought that the discourse was at a point where you can talk to Nick Fuentes, have a casual conversation with him about, you know, a whiter America and international Jewry, and people wouldn't care or wouldn't be able to do anything to you about it. But on the right, it has become this infight where you have the more corporate and establishment element of the party that is all of a sudden realizing that they've let a lot of Nazis into the right-wing movement. And so Nick Fuentes kind of represents the moment where the fever breaks and people realize that this is a real form of ideology that actually has a lot of purchase in the movement. And whether it be Nick Fuentes or his followers or other commentators like him, it's this whole culture on the right of sort of reveling in Hitlerism, Nazism, and white nationalism and fascism. And Nick Fuentes has always been on the cutting edge of that. And so I'm not going to play much from this interview, but just this quick moment where right at the beginning where they're talking about Hassan. And they mentioned the interview that Hassan did recently with Ross Douthat. And, you know, Ross was trying to grill him about what he actually believes. And I'm not here to just make this about Hassan and just defending him, because I also thought he could have done a little bit better in that interview. But this is what they had to say about it real quick. And I think this just shows first of all, how dumb they are, but also the dishonesty of the entire conversation.
I think they lie. Like when Hassan was asked, what is your cause? He gave like...
Now, yeah, when questioned about whether they're like socialists or communists, I'll be like, oh, I'm a social democrat or a democratic socialist or whatever. But do you really think that they're lying, and do they know that they're lying?
Yes, I think it's intentional. I think they're obscuring it.
Mm-hmm. But to what end?
But do you think,
what does Hassan Piker really
do you
want?
think like Hassan Piker and Zohran Mamdani actually want to reappropriate the wealth of like middle class white people at gunpoint?
I do, yeah. Okay. I think that, well, I mean, you know, Hassan, he is a Marxist, and I think Zohran is a democratic socialist. He said there shouldn't be billionaires. So it's like, what's the implication? There's going to be like a confiscation or a taxation policy that's confiscation.
So this is such a dumb critique here, such an obvious case of kind of self-analysis disguised as a criticism. Because she says that in this moment where Ross asked him if he would support, going to Beverly Hills with like police force and by force stealing people's assets, he was calling up this image of like a Marxist seizure of the means of production and asking Hassan if that's what he believes in. And Hassan genuinely could have gave a better answer to that. I'll play it real quick.
So it goes into, Beverly Hills or something, and it says, today, the city council has voted to expropriate your lavish, undeserved wealth and return your homes to the people. And that's backed up by police power, so it's violent, but it's not shooting people against the wall. But like, is that what you mean? That kind of redirection?
A similar structure, I think, like has been attempted or was exhibited in Cuba, and I think it was Fidel Castro himself who personally took back any farmland from his own family members that went above and beyond what the state had designed. Now, obviously, this is a terrifying concept for a lot of people. So this is so far out in the future.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, this is so far out in the future. For even someone like myself that like I don't even see the necessity of arguing on how this would work.
Yeah, so I mean I think the answer to that is pretty easy, which is like, no, obviously that's not what it would look like because that's not how the law works in America. And also that's not necessary in terms of when we're talking about redistribution, we're talking about tax policy and just setting laws up so that businesses' funds are allocated differently. This idea of like seizing land or like gold or money from people in Beverly Hills, it's just a stupid premise. And I think for whatever reason in that interview, Hassan was maybe like, at least in that moment, he also articulates what I'm saying, but I think in that moment, he didn't do a good job of just being like, that's a dumb way to think about what my ideology is. However, to try to say that that's an example of Hassan lying about what he believes. What he believes in is communist, radical, eat the rich, and yet he's lying about it and he's saying, I'm just a reasonable democratic socialist or whatever. And meanwhile, you're sitting with Nick Fuentes, whose entire movement is based on deception and trying to create a veneer of acceptability in order to normalize ideas like mass murder, or just the idea that it's better for America to be majority white. That was not a normal thing to think not that long ago, but Nick Fuentes has normalized it. And so that seems to be the Red Scare project. I think this is the ultimate realization of what the project has always been. I think Dasha has been interested in Nick Fuentes for a long time, probably has been listening to him for a long, long time. I know she's mentioned it before. Probably a big part of this Christian nationalist turn that she's taken has been because of Nick Fuentes. It just smells like a grift and just a lie through and through. And so, like I said, they cloak themselves in this irony and this idea that we're post-woke, so nothing we say matters and none of this stuff actually matters. And yet you come up against a wall when the person that you are platforming is Nick Fuentes. And I just think it's funny that they're all dealing with that. Them, Tucker Carlson. The controversy is real. And that's because this movement in the Conservative Party, I think the more establishment types that are now posturing against that, even people that are part of the establishment of the Heritage Foundation and whatnot, most of which are Zionists, are now starting to understand that what they've let into the movement isn't, ironic racism, and it's not just owning the libs, and it's also not anti-Zionist. You know what I mean? Like, it's the ideology is not about opposing Zionism, because they don't actually care about what that ideology does. They just care about the fact that they feel like Jews are controlling America. And so the nature of that conspiracy and the widest blanket that they can possibly cast in terms of how much of American society is controlled by Jews is what they are interested in. And that has become what the Republican Party is, especially a lot of the young Republican movement. And so you're seeing not just opposition to Israel in that, but you're starting to see, Holocaust denial, glorification of Hitler, glorification of the Holocaust in pretty mainstream ranks of the Republican Party. And I don't know how they think they can win that, because when it comes to the actual power and political capital that the right now has, it's almost entirely as a function of that movement. And Nick Fuentes, what makes him a formidable enough figure that he's lasted all this time and seems to even be gaining momentum now, is that he identified that hatred is a very powerful political motivator. And so you can keep it as an undercurrent of your movement as long as it's there. And that's where the cheeky jokes come from and whatnot. And so once that goes away, and once you start trying to clamp down on that and reinstate the fact that that's not allowed, you don't have a movement anymore. And so there's no way for the Republican Party to recover from the fact that they've allowed that in. And so what's more likely to happen is that Israel is going to continue to be a focus and a lightning rod in American politics. And the way that politicians handle that issue is going to define how they're viewed by a broader young demographic. And also it's going to define where the future of American politics is. Because if people view our relationship with Israel as one of us being exploited by the Jews, the answer is not going to just be, cut off ties with Israel and arms embargo or whatever. They are going to demand a deeper, more genocidal solution to that problem in their view. We've been here before. That is the right-wing reactionary approach. And so politicians who are offering a vision of the issue that correctly calls to attention the fact that Israel as a nation and their abuse of human rights is the problem. And it's a chance for America to distance ourselves from that on the world stage. And in doing so, a politician like Zohran Mamdani can also focus on the politics of America in a way that is designed to make people's life easier here and alleviate inequality here. Because as long as inequality exists, there are always going to be right-wing reactionaries that find a way to make a cultural and racial argument about it because they don't want to address the inequality. And you see this with J.D. Vance, where he is willing to come out and say, young people feel like housing is so unaffordable. And the reason is because all of these immigrants are coming over here and making housing more expensive. That's bullshit. Obviously, he knows that's bullshit. But it's a way to not address the problem that housing is a commodity that is speculated on, and many units are built just to lay empty so that they can accrue more value and be betted on and traded for more. And so the politicians that are willing to address those economic factors and oppose what is considered vaguely to be the establishment, those are going to be the ones who give us a way out of this incredibly fascistic moment that we're finding ourselves in. Because people like Nick Fuentes and his enablers want us to continue barreling in a direction where violence is more normalized as a solution. Violence against people in your community is normalized as something that simply needs to be done. And the problems of inequality are a result of international Jewry. The right is always going to keep taking us in that direction. Again, they've done this before. We've been here before. And so it's up to us, it's up to the left to offer a version of politics that can move people away from that so that when this moment ends, and it looks like it's coming to an end, because again, these people thought that they couldn't be canceled anymore or that it doesn't matter anymore, and yet somehow it's never mattered as much as when Nick Fuentes starts coming around. And that's because people know what this guy actually represents. So now that the movement is crashing because the head of the movement is being outed as a pedophile more and more, and he's freaking out, absolutely freaking out, just about the fact that the House would pass this bill about him releasing the files. That doesn't even mean that they get released. But he's flipping out, he's unendorsing Marjorie Taylor Greene, falling apart, and we're certainly not anywhere near the end of this term yet. But it seems like there is now some pushback to this normalization of fascism that seemed pretty unchallenged in the first leg of Trump's presidency. And after that comes out in the wash, you're going to have a bunch of people that still have their economic frustrations, and they're still all mixed up emotionally, and they still don't know who to point the finger at. But they're going to have these reactionary ideas in their head because people like Nick Fuentes have spread them very far. And so when Zohran Mamdani and his administration takes over in New York, and they immediately set to work figuring out how the law and like old laws and case law in New York can be utilized to pressure companies to bring down their prices, something that's materially designed to affect someone's life like on the front end. It's a consumer side result. That's not a strategy that's focused on 5 years from now or 5 years after my administration is gone. You'll start to feel some positive effects in your life. But right now, the tools of government can be used to make your life better, and in a way that's balanced, that's not going to, tip the scales of society in some dangerous direction. If people see that can work, they'll gravitate to it, especially as the hatred method starts to become more tiresome, more unbearable, more cringe, all of which it will with people like Dasha Nekrasova, Nick Fuentes, and Donald Trump being the ones who are peddling it. But the solution is not an amalgamous, nameless populism that can only serve to continue to establish corporate dominance, but find a way to make it nicer, but rather something that actually challenges that corporate dominance. And that's the interesting thing about what they said about Hassan's ideology. They said Hassan obviously believes in appropriation of middle-class resources. That's what they said in that video, because he believes in that there shouldn't be billionaires. So that's a crazy equivalence being drawn between those things that obviously is not equivalent. But they're also scratching up against the issue that is creating all of this culture war discourse in the first place, which is the inequality. So they thrive in that space where they can point at the inequality, they can point at the elephant in the room, and then they come up with a bunch of ridiculous solutions, explanations, rationalizations for it, rather than the very simple policy of people need to, by law, be required to distribute the profits and the means of production of their company more equally, and ownership of businesses and money needs to be less concentrated. It's a very coherent ideology, and it's only going to become more appealing to people, hopefully, if it works in places like New York and Seattle, but also as the fascist movement continues to reveal itself as impotent, flawed, disgusting, reprehensible, etc.